Why did the United States attack Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen? Why are U.S. operatives helping to destabilize Syria? And why is the United States government so intent on taking down Iran, in spite of the fact that Iran has not attacked any country since 1798? And what's next? What are we headed for? When you look at the current trajectory that we're on, it doesn't make any sense at all if you evaluate it based on what we're taught in school. And it doesn't make any sense if you base your worldview on the propaganda that the mainstream media tries to pass off as news. But it makes perfect sense once you know the real motives of the powers that be. In order to understand those motives, we first have to take a look at history. In 1945, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world reserve currency, which meant that international commodities were priced in dollars. The agreement, which gave the United States a distinct financial advantage, was made under the condition that those dollars would remain redeemable for gold at a consistent rate of $35 per ounce. The United States promised not to print very much money, but this was on the honor system, because the Federal Reserve refused to allow any audits or supervision of its printing presses. In the years leading up to 1970, expenditures in the Vietnam War made it clear to many countries that the U.S. was printing far more money than it had in gold. And in response, they began to ask for their gold back. This, of course, set off a rapid decline in the value of the dollar. The situation climaxed in 1971 when France attempted to withdraw its gold and Nixon refused. On August 15th, he made the following announcement.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This was obviously not a temporary suspension, as he claimed, but rather a permanent default. And for the rest of the world who had entrusted the United States with their gold, it was outright theft. In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only U.S. dollars as payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the world's key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. The act of moving the dollar off of gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil-importing country in the world to start maintaining a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the Petro-Dollar. Paper went out, everything America needed came in, and the United States got very, very rich as a result. It was the largest financial con in recorded history. The arms race of the Cold War was a game of poker. Military expenditures were the chips, and the U.S. had an endless supply of chips. With the Petro-Dollar under its belt, it was able to raise the stakes higher and higher, outspending every other country on the planet, until eventually U.S. military expenditures surpassed that of all other nations in the world combined. The Soviet Union never had a chance. The collapse of the communist bloc in 1991 removed the last counterbalance to American military might. The United States was now an undisputed superpower with no rival. Many hoped that this would mark the beginning of a new era of peace and stability. Unfortunately, there were those in high places who had other ideas. Within that same year, the U.S. invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War. And after crushing the Iraqi military and destroying their infrastructure, including water purification plants and hospitals, crippling sanctions were imposed which prevented that infrastructure from being rebuilt. These sanctions, which were initiated by Bush Sr. and sustained throughout the entire Clinton administration, lasted for over a decade and were estimated to have killed over 500,000 children. The Clinton administration was fully aware of these figures.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it? I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Miss Albright, what exactly was it that was worth killing 500,000 kids for? And no November of 2000, Iraq began selling its oil exclusively in euros. This was a direct attack on the dollar and on U.S. financial dominance, and it wasn't going to be tolerated. In response, the U.S. government, with the assistance of the mainstream media, began to build up a massive propaganda campaign claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was planning to use them. In 2003, the U.S. invaded, and once they had control of the country, oil sales were immediately switched back to dollars. This is particularly notable due to the fact that switching back to the dollar meant a 15 to 20% loss in revenue due to the euro's higher value. It doesn't make any sense at all unless you take the Petro-Dollar into account.
So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Let's take a look at the events of the past decade and see if you see a pattern. In Libya, Gaddafi was in the process of organizing a bloc of African countries to create a gold-based currency called the dinar, which they intended to use to replace the dollar in that region. US and NATO forces helped destabilize and topple the Libyan government in 2011, and after taking control of the region, US armed rebels executed Gaddafi in cold blood and immediately set up the Libyan central bank. Iran has been actively campaigning to pull oil sales off of the dollar for some time now, and it has recently secured agreements to begin trading its oil in exchange for gold. In response, the US government, with mainstream media assistance, has been attempting to build international support for military strikes on the pretext of preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon. In the meantime, they established sanctions which US officials openly admit are aimed at causing a collapse of the Iranian economy. Syria is Iran's closest ally, and they are bound by mutual defense agreements. The country is currently in the process of being destabilized with covert assistance from NATO, and though Russia and China have warned the United States not to get involved, the White House has made statements within the past month indicating that they are considering military intervention. It should be clear that military intervention in Syria and Iran isn't being considered. It's a foregone conclusion, just as it was in Iraq and Libya. The US is actively working to create the context which gives them the diplomatic cover to do what they already have planned. The motive for these invasions and covert actions becomes clear when we look at them in their full context and connect the dots. Those who control the United States understand that even if a few countries begin to sell their oil in another currency, it will set off a chain reaction and the dollar will collapse. They understand that there is absolutely nothing else holding up the value of the dollar at this point, and so does the rest of the world. But rather than accepting the fact that the dollar is nearing the end of its lifespan, the powers that be have made a calculated gambit. They have decided to use the brute force of the US military to crush each and every resistant state in the Middle East and Africa. That in itself would be bad enough, but what you need to understand is that this is not going to end with Iran. China and Russia have stated publicly on no uncertain terms that they will not tolerate an attack on Iran or Syria. Iran is one of their key allies, one of the last independent oil producers in the region, and they understand that if Iran falls, then they will have no way to escape the dollar without going to war. And yet the United States is pushing forward in spite of the warnings. What we are witnessing here is a trajectory that leads straight to the unthinkable. It's a trajectory that was mapped out years ago in full awareness of the human consequences. But who was it that put us on this course? What kind of psychopath is willing to intentionally set off a global conflict that will lead to millions of deaths just to protect the value of a paper currency? It obviously isn't the president. The decision to invade Libya, Syria, and Iran was made long before Obama had risen to the national spotlight. And yet, he's carrying out his duty just like the puppets that preceded him. So who is it that pulls the strings? Often the best answer to questions like this are found by asking another question. Qui bono? Who benefits? Obviously, those who have the power to print the dollar out of thin air have the most to lose if the dollar were to fall. And since 1913, that power has been held by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private entity owned by a conglomerate of the most powerful banks in the world. And the men who control those banks are the ones who pull the strings. To them, this is just a game. Your life and the lives of those you love are just pawns on their chessboard. And like a spoiled 4-year-old who tips the board onto the floor when they start to lose, the powers that be are willing to start World War III to keep control of the global financial system. Remember that when these wars extend and accelerate. Remember that when your son or your neighbor's son comes back home in a flag-draped coffin. Remember that when they point the finger at the new boogeyman. Because the madmen who are running this show will take this as far as you allow them to.
Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone, and salutation to the Akim out there pushing this truth and sincerity throughout the four corners of the earth. What you just viewed there was a brief look on history as well as what's going to happen in the future because of this petrodollar. All right. What this video certainly described, and all you have to do is just do your research, is that America's dominance was this dollar, attached to the oil, which all nations had to use if they wanted to purchase oil. They had to use the American dollar. But as we're seeing now, if you've been looking at the news media lately or current events, nations are leaving or moving away from the dollar and backing it with other commodities via gold or oil. So let's go to a quick scripture first. This is the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 6. How are things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? And us men out here at Great Millstone, we search the matter out. I mean, we get into history, we get into current events, because our main goal is to prophesy and to reveal this devil, okay, and to reveal why America's going down in flames, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. All right, so let's. I'll get to 7, but first I want to get to the first news article. This is from Zero Hedge. All right, I put it in a reader's view because I had it the other way and my computer kept freezing, so I think that was Satan trying to mess with this video. So, but I'll put the articles up on YouTube so you can read it for yourself. This is from Zero Hedge. It says de-dollarization accelerates as Russia nears launch of ruble-priced oil trading platforms. It goes on, it says, it appears Russia is close to taking the next big steps towards de-dollarization and killing the petrodollar as Vladimir Putin's dream of ruble-based pricing of his domestically produced oil is on the verge of realization. The St. Petersburg International Mercantile Exchange is actively courting international oil traders to join its emerging futures market, which, as Bloomberg reports, is designed to create a system where Russian oil is priced and traded in a fair and straightforward way, meaning no longer have to depend on the pricing according to the US dollar. Now they can price it according to their own currency. All right. So that right there just proves, and Russia's the second largest oil exporter in the world. All right. You can look that up in the CIA fact finder. Just go to CIA.com world facts, and it shows that Russia's the second producer in oil. Step by step Russia, China, and other emerging economies are taking measures to reduce their dependence on the US dollar, and as Sputnik News detail, F. William Engdahl warns, referring to Russia's crude oil benchmark initiative, this move could deal a dramatic blow to the petrodollar's dominance. All right. So right there you have it. I mean, a lot of these nations are moving away from the dollar, which is going to be a dramatic blow to the American dollar, and there's going to be all hell breaking loose here in America. Because that's key word. If nobody wants to use the dollar anymore, that means it has no value, it has no faith. All right. Hence, it's not worthless, and that's what you get, inflation. It goes on. The article says the move is part of a longer-term strategy of decoupling Russia's economy, especially its very significant export of oil, from the U.S. dollar. Today, the Achilles heel of the Russian economy. It is part of the de-dollarization move that Russia, China, and a growing number of other countries have quietly began. The American researcher writes in his recent article for New Eastern Outlook. That's right, because your news media, your mainstream media, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, okay, CNBC are not going to tell you that all these major nations are running away from the dollar. Okay, that's why it says quietly. Okay, So let's get to another verse, Obadiah chapter 1, verse 7. All the men of thy confederacy, that's right, because Russia, China at one point were confederate with Babylon, America, all right, mainly to keep us Israelites, us so-called black Spanish and Native Americans down, okay, and in the condition that we live in. All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. And what's the primary of the border? Look at all these military troops, all right, the military bases throughout the four corners of the earth, okay, except for they're not in Russia or in China, because Russia and China are not stupid. But America's military has bases near their countries. That's the reason why all this tension is building up in South China Sea as well as in Ukraine. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread, that bread, okay, you can use it metaphorically or you can use it literally. What bread are they talking about? That US dollar. Have laid a wound on their thee. And what's that wound? Well, they're escaping the US dollar, all right? And they're using their own currency and other commodities to keep their nations going. There is none understanding in him, okay? And that's why, you know, you can look at this both ways. In America, there's no understanding America because these people thinking that they're going to go on forever in America, which is bullshit. This place is going to burn. And all these other nations thinking they're going to try to be the next empire, which is a lie. It's not going to happen because the next empire, the final empire that comes after Esau's empire is the nation Israel. Okay, 12 tribes of Israel, and Yahushua comes back. So let's get to another news article right here. This is from the Bloomberg.com. All right, it says Putin's decade-old dream realized as Russia to price its own oil. Russian President Vladimir Putin is on the verge of realizing a decade-old dream: Russian oil priced in Russia. The nation's largest commodity exchange, whose chairman is Putin Ali Egar-Sekin, however you say this Edomite stupid name, is courting international oil traders to join its emerging futures market. The goal is to increase revenue from Urals crude by disconnecting the price-setting mechanism from the world's most used Brent oil benchmark, another word, the American dollar, another aim to move away from quoting petroleum in U.S. dollars, see? So they're running away from the U.S. dollar, and this is from Bloomberg News. The goal, let me continue down here. The goal is to create a system where Russian oil is priced and traded in a fair and straightforward way, said Alexia Rubenkov, president of the St. Petersburg International Mercantile Exchange, in a phone interview. Okay, it goes on and says Russia, which exports about half its crude, has long complained about the size of the discounts for lower quality Urals oil compared to North Sea Brent prices, which are assessed by Platts Agency. With world oil prices down by half in the past 2 years and Russia facing the prospect of its worst budget deficit as a percentage of its economic output since 2010. Now, why did this happen 2 years ago? Well, what happened 2 years ago? Well, when Russia sacked Crimea, America then put sanctions on. And how do you put sanctions on a country when a country has to use American dollars to purchase oil? See? So that's why Russia is now scrambling and saying, well, we're going to go use our own currency, okay, which the Lord put the spirit in them to do, because that's how America's going to fall, because, you know, these idiots here in America, they really think that that these countries are going to use the American dollar, and they're not. They're running away from it. Only the elite know what's going on. It needs every dollar of petroleum revenue it can get. Having its own futures market would improve Russian oil price discovery as well as help domestic companies generate extra revenue from trading, said Rumenikov. Okay, now let's go to the reason, another scripture why America, Salakia, why America is Babylon and why that dollar is what made America so great. This is Jeremiah 51 verse 7. Babylon had been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. How was all the earth drunken? By using that fiat currency, the US dollar. Okay? The nations have drunken of her wine. And what was that wine? Not only the American dollar, the philosophy of America. Do what thou wilt. Okay? You can do whatever you want. All you got to do is work hard for it. All that nonsense. Okay? Therefore, the nations are mad. And when you look up that word mad in the Hebrew, it's halal, which means proud, boastful, Okay, prideful. Okay, and all these nations are prideful because they benefited off of America. They made a lot of money off of Babylon, America. Verse 8, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. How for her? Take balm for her pain. If so, be she may be healed. And that's the Lord really mocking America because she's not going to be healed. She's going to burn. Okay? When that dollar collapses, that's when all hell's going to break loose and all these people are going to kill each other here in America, chasing after commodities, trying to spend this worthless dollar. And that's when they'll have to bring in martial law and that's all when, if you've been listening to Great Millstone, okay, we on the Highways of Lives have been talking about when martial law comes, people are going to be snatched out of their homes. So let's get to this article again, just to prove that other nations are leaving. Here we go. Moscow is not alone in its push to change global oil pricing. China, which vies with the U.S. as the world's biggest crude importer, has spent 2 decades trying to introduce its own oil futures contract, now expected this year. All right, and what was one thing that China is doing? They're going to go with Russia, and they're going to now trade with Russia and Russia's oil. Not only that, China is now going with their yuan going with the yuan and backing their yuan with the gold. So everybody's running away from the American dollar. Iran and Venezuela, members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, have called for trading oil in other currencies than the U.S. dollar. See, Iran is a key player right here, and Venezuela. And notice how Venezuela is in an economic catastrophe. All right. Well, why is that happening? You think because, people are just rioting and they want to make government change? No, the U.S. is doing that. They put pressure on Venezuela. You better use our dollar or else. All right? So let's continue going on. So instead of the economic, which I'll get back to, look what's going on in the Middle East. This is from Sputnik News. This came out May 9th of 2016. Says Middle East leaders give up on Obama, turn to Putin. That's according to Ezekiel 38. All right, all these Arabian countries are now looking at Obama like, yo, you're not even doing anything in the Middle East. You're just basically just having proxy wars. You're not even and Russia came in and pretty much protected Assad. So the article goes on and says America may seem strong regarding its military capability in the region, but for some reason, local leaders are becoming frequent visitors in Moscow, not Washington, D.C., Ross wrote in a piece for Politico. The diplomat noted that the Arabs, as well as Israelis, gave up on Obama because of its indecisiveness. See? Because America is Babylon, all confusion. It goes on and says, and the guy, Ross, he was an Obama aide. You can look that up. The guy, see if I can find his actual name here. Ross. He was an aide to Obama. Ross something. You can look it up. I'll put the article on YouTube so you can read it. I want to get to the key point. Ross added that the Syrian operation didn't just consolidate the position of Bashar Assad, but in many respects pushed Moscow out of international isolation. Moreover, it is now President Obama himself calling Putin and seeking his assistance in pressuring Assad, making it obvious who has the stronger position. Quote, Middle Eastern leaders recognize it as well and realize they need to be talking to Russians if they are to safeguard their interests. There you go. Ross wrote, it would be better if internationally Putin were seen to be losing, but he is not. Ezekiel 38. All right. And last article. This is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is now diversifying their portfolio and they're want to get away from oil. It says Saudi Arabia on Monday said that it plans to make itself capable of living without oil within the next 4 years. A very ambitious goal for a country that exports more of the energy source than anyone else in the world. See, everyone's getting away from America, man. That American dollar, that petrodollar. Let me just get to the point. petrodollar in danger. Economies in the world which Middle East have been taking big hits from the oil prices, and that could prompt them to take further action. When Saudi Arabia agreed back in the 1970s to price all its future oil sales in U.S. dollars in return for military protection, that meant that any country who wanted to buy oil from the kingdom would have to buy dollars to make the transaction. Jody Chudley wrote in a recent article for the Daily Reckoning, "The petrodollar has done wonderful things for asset prices in the United States," said Chudley. But the relationship between between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia has deteriorated, particularly after the Western nations reached a deal with Iran over Tehran's nuclear program. So even Saudi Arabia is now looking at America sideways and getting away from America, and that's the death of the dollar. So last scripture. This is the book of Proverbs, chapter 11, verse 28. He that trusteth in riches shall fall, and that's you so-called white people here in America, you Edomites. You trust in your riches. You think America's going to go, but it's going to fall. The dollar will die, and you're going to die with it. Thus saith the Lord. But the righteous shall flourish as a branch. And who are the righteous? The elect of the Israelites. Okay, Lord willing, we are part of it, but you're looking at them, the members of Great Millstone, because they're the ones that get into prophecy. They're the ones that are telling you what's to come, and they bring out facts. They just don't speak opinion, and they just don't talk according to what they feel in their heart. They bring out facts. All right? And with that, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone. And salutation to Yakim out there pushing the truth and sincerity throughout the four corners of the earth. And with that, again, death to America. Shalom.